morning conference. If I could introduce Steyning Grammar School in our context briefly to put my ruminations on leadership into context. We're a large school, 2,000 on roll, 11 to 18. We are a non-selective grammar school and a 400-year-old comprehensive, which perhaps tells you something about the complexity of our school. We're a day and residential school. 125 of our students choose to live with us, and we have a catchment that's semi-rural and coastal strip. And we're 4 years into what we call our aspirational journey to excellence. And I mention that context because within that context, I think leadership is hugely important. We're a split site moving next year to a second split site, so a 3-site school. And that complexity and aspiration means that leadership at every level is absolutely crucial to us delivering the best outcomes for our students. I was looking for inspiration. I'm an English teacher by craft, and among such august colleagues, I thought I need to clearly find some literary muse to hook you in at the beginning. And this is what I found. The answer, of course, is in the modern toss. I don't know if I can say that. I have. Modern toss greeting cards. It was my partner's birthday. I was looking for a birthday card, and this sums up, actually, my message on leadership. Here's an idea. Why don't we just do stuff that's going to be really massively successful? And I think if you looked at any of the Belbin research, completer finishing is, I think, something that school leaders are not particularly good at. Certainly in my team, it's something I'm challenging our team completely to look at is let's evaluate the impact of what we've done before we start the hamster wheel of the new school development plan. So this chimed with me greatly. And that sums up the first of 5 quick reflections on leadership at Steyning Grammar School that I want to share with you. And the first is that we need to keep the message really simple. We need to ensure we have a really simple core business message that every stakeholder understands. And for me, it's like when you're watching a lesson observation and the teacher is still doing the penny drop moment. They're doing the same thing again and again and again, hoping the penny's going to drop. And I wonder whether I reflect on myself when I'm talking about the school development plan, our self-evaluation cycle, and I get in these glazed looks from colleagues, whether that actually is my fault for having a too complex systems. So we've moved to a much simplified school development plan and SEF cycle that ties into each other really closely, really simply. And this year we're a long way from the doorstep development plans and SEFs for Ofsted to actually just 3 key messages that every faculty, every subject area is going to deliver on. I think leadership is its strongest when the message is clearest, and the foundations of excellent leadership are not particularly sexy. They're about this development plan, SEF, appraisal cycle. And I think the core message needs to be able to be put on one page. So I challenge my leadership team to put everything we're prescriptive about in our school on one sheet, and this was it. So we have a mission statement that says everything is about learning, that we have the highest expectations, that we have a Steyning family that every stakeholder should want to come to every day, built on an ethos of care, kindness, and acceptance and celebration of diversity. We take every opportunity to tell our stakeholders that message. That then converts into our development plan. And we just have 4 priorities. And those 4 headings on the bottom left, every subject, every faculty, every year team, our catering business, our premises teams, those are their 4 key directives. And this is all I'm prescriptive about in the school. Everything should be about effective learning for every student. We can only achieve that through a commitment to high quality professional development. We have to invest in leadership to enable the first 2 to happen. And we added on that we have to have a moral imperative to improve outcomes for our disadvantaged and bursary students. This year we've reflected that that message is a bit too static. We need to continually remind colleagues, remind students, remind parents, remind governors where we are on our journey as a school from a very interventionist model 3-4 years ago towards effective learning in the classroom for every single student. The second reflection I'd have on leadership is we must invest in leadership. Moving into schools, I found schools have far greater commitment to training at their core than I think business and industry. But I think schools haven't had a strong enough investment in leadership. There's been an element of sink or swim when colleagues are promoted as fantastic teachers into leadership positions that can sometimes set them up to fail. So I think schools can have, and we're putting in place, an effective induction leadership training campaign that also then picks up pathways for leadership at every single level. We can have explicit leadership questions in our interviewing, explicit leadership panels if we're interviewing colleagues for a leadership position. We're talking a lot at conference this week about the engine room being middle leaders. I would stretch that metaphor to be anyone in any position of leadership anywhere in our school is deserving and needing leadership support and training if we're going to have effective capacity to deliver on our core message. I think a reflection of when I could see that was working is we had a residential leadership training weekend last term. 36 colleagues had been through it, and I was listening to explicit discussions on leaderships following their 360 from a group that included my PA, who heads our administration team, our head of English, our head of premises, our head of history, and our bursar. And for each of those, the development of their leadership capacity was equally important for us to deliver our whole school message. I think there is a model of leadership that we can support every colleague in being able to deliver. And this was my best guess at what this is. I think every leader in our school is interpreting that first page of our development plan to look at how those highest expectations, that vision, can be implemented as a plan. They're then monitoring the impact of that plan, evaluating its effectiveness, and then intervening to bring it back to its core purpose. And at every stage of that cycle, there's a different leadership skill that every colleague needs to be able to employ. From the visionary and strategic, to the persuasive and consultative, to the delegative, to the collaborative, the analytical leadership, the directive leadership, the reflective leadership. I think everyone in a position of leadership in school needs explicit training support on those hard and soft skills. And then we start to get really effective leadership at every level. I've been looking this year at Steyning Grammar School at the idea of earned autonomy. Because if we have interviewed effectively for leadership, if we've supported colleagues in developing their leadership capacity, if we've changed the culture so that leaders are asking for support in areas that they find leadership more difficult, I then need to learn to let go. And as a control freak, I found that hard. I can give an example. I remember several conferences ago, we were talking about professional learning communities. And the first professional learning community in year one, when I became head at Steyning Grammar, I said, you can do whatever you like. In your professional learning community, do whatever you like, so long as it delivers that core vision. 3-4 years on, the core drivers of our school development plan came out of that first year. The second year, I thought, that's fantastic, all that capacity, all that great work. I'll tell you what, I'm going to be directive. Now I'm going to make them focus entirely on lesson objectives and assessment for learning within the lesson. And that year of professional learning communities was a disaster. Nothing interesting came out, colleagues didn't enjoy it, and I'd learnt again that letting go, once I'd set that clear framework, produced definitely by far the best results. So we call it earned autonomy, letting leaders go, but I think we have to call it assumed earned autonomy. The earned autonomy message for me makes it feel like they've got to prove that they can do it before we're going to let them go. I think we actually have to assume that they have the skills because we've got that self-reflection on leadership embedded in the school ethos to enable them to be able to lead and to be able to lead in their way, delivering on that school development plan. Of course, then as heads, we're looking for where that's not working. Our own triangulation will guide us to where we need to step in and perhaps be more explicit with support. My final reflections would be on being brave and being relentlessly optimistic. I can remember when I wasn't a head, in my head continually all that was going around was what I would want to do if I were head teacher. When I'm head teacher, I would. I think being deputy is the hardest job in the world because you're deputising, you're doing all the hard work of a head teacher, but you're not you haven't to put in place someone else's vision. And that's what I try and remind myself about continuing. I go back to my original pitch, my original presentation when I applied to be head. What did I want to do? What was I going to do differently? All that boldness I had when I was a frustrated deputy, am I doing that as head? Because I don't believe there's any such thing as a closed door. I think anything we can't do, we find a way round. I continually try and remember what is it I wanted to do when I was head teacher. And this, I think, is the bravest thing we're doing so far. As I was trying to reflect, what have we done that's brave then at Steyning Grammar School? Yes, I think we celebrate diversity with an equalities programme that's exceptional. I think we link with employers for employability skills in a way that's really different. But learning characteristics is something where we have taken our own tangent. And these 8 learning characteristics at Steyning Grammar School are embedded in how we report and how we assess. We report and assess on those 8 learning characteristics and academic afterwards. We mentor, and our pastoral systems are built on these 8 learning characteristics, and we look at academics afterwards. And we truly believe as a leadership team, the broadest possible leadership team, that if we get this right, and if we lead well according to these 8 characteristics, then transformational academic outcomes will be there, but as a byproduct of something far more exciting, a long-term success criteria that will be about students flourishing as happy and successful young adults. And I guess that's my final reflection is about relentless optimism. We know how, when we're having a bad day, we cannot let it show in our face. I've applied to my governors for a grant for me to have Botox injections, just to keep that slight smile on my face of calm optimism. And like you, colleagues, I know that all we have to do to make that smile real is get out there into our schools, walk around and see what the students are doing. So thank you very much for listening to me today and for hearing a bit about Steyning Grammar School. Thank you.